Hi, everybody. Welcome to our webinar for today. We'll be speaking about communication strategies for your vital signs program. We'll start off today just by going over a couple of housekeeping rules just to get started. So just to let you know, everybody is muted on the line, and that's just to avoid outside noises, interruptions, and feedback. So everybody should be able to hear me, but we can't hear you. Following this webinar, we will be sharing a recording of this webinar as well as the presentation slides on the CFC website and over the listserv for those who are signed up to the Vital Signs listserv. Also on our website, you'll be able to find a list of other webinars that we have available that are coming up on other topics. In order for you to have the best viewing of the presentation, please close any other applications you may have open on your computer, such as your email or Word documents, and make sure that the volume is turned up on your computer. So the format of our presentation today will be a high-level overview and introduction by our Director of Comms at CFC, Jen Valorant, which will be followed by two presentations. Today on the line, we have Nicole Gagliardi with the Community Foundation of Greater Peterborough and Miranda Hassell and Sasha Chabot-Gaspé with the Toronto Foundation. So it's going to be a little bit of a different format this week for those of you that have been following along on our Vital Signs webinars. We did share our webinar slides in advance over the listserv, and so those have already been presented. If you have any questions on those, Jen and I are happy to set up a meeting and we can chat about communication strategy at a broader level. But today we're going to just do a quick high-level overview, and then we'll be hearing from members of the network who have great experiences they'd like to share. So at the end of those presentations, we will reserve about 20 minutes for a question and answer session. So we encourage you to use the little chat box on the side of your screen there where it says questions. You can insert your questions there since everybody is muted, and then we can kind of check and see, interrupt if there is an appropriate time or if the question is pressing, or we can save the questions for the end of our presentation when we will be having that question and answer session for our presenters. So we'll get started, and to begin, I'll turn it over to Jen.
Thanks, Allison. Pleased to meet everybody. Bonjour tout le monde. I'll be speaking in English today since the majority of our participants are anglophones. However, si vous êtes francophone, bonjour et bienvenue. Ça me ferait vraiment un très grand plaisir de se planifier une rencontre en français à votre convenance. Donc, n'hésitez pas à me rejoindre par courriel. I'm really delighted to be here. This is actually my first ever webinar with on any subject with the Community Foundation movement. I joined CFC about a month ago now as the Director of Communications, coming from the Canada Council for the Arts, which is just down the street here in Ottawa. I'm really excited to jump in and collaborate with so many of you and get to know you through this really exciting program. What you've got up on your screen right now speaks to, I think, the diversity of the program. We do call it that in Nicole's remarks. You will see exactly why we do call it a program as opposed to a report, because there's so many different ways and really a diversity of experiences depending on the size of your community, the size of your community foundation, what you're seeking to achieve. So what you've got up here are all the ways, or actually some of the ways in which the Vital Signs program can play out, whether that's a vital conversation, whether it's a vital brief, a focus, or the full Monty at the bottom there. As Allison said, you received the deck, which is historically what David Venn, my predecessor, and Lee Rose, and some other staff here at CFC have presented. What we thought we would do is send it to you as an advanced pre-read and as a guideline. So what you'll see there as communicators, I don't think is any huge surprise to you, but it's really an overview about the value of setting a communication strategy for the type of program that you want to run, knowing that you know what might play out in BC, what might play out in Mississauga, Community Foundation in South Saskatchewan or Nova Scotia will look quite different, but that a sort of base approach to planning the comm strategy asks some of these fundamental questions. I won't spend time going through the full deck with you today because we really want you to hear from the two case studies that have super kindly agreed to present. So Sasha and Miranda will speak from the Toronto Community Foundation to some of their really great work on the digital front and on media relations. And Nicole from Peterborough will speak to the program and some of the fantastic and really innovative ways in which Peterborough has taken its vital signs program forward. However, I would like to invite you to, if you want at all to brainstorm, if you want to check in, see how we can amplify your work, how we can connect not only CFC and your local efforts, but perhaps engage the movement more broadly, I'd be really keen to hear from you individually, and then maybe look at using our Slack group or other forums online to really amplify and create some cohesion in our efforts and celebrate what you're doing at the local level and weave that into our content strategy. So you'll see our emails up on the screen. Feel free to reach out, and it would be our absolute pleasure in the next couple of weeks to set some time aside, get to know you, hear about what your plans are, what your questions are, and go from there. So without further ado, I will pass it over to our first presenters.
Thanks, Jen. Nicole Gagliardi here from Peterborough. I just want to get started for folks who aren't familiar with the foundation here in Greater Peterborough. We're a small foundation. We're fairly young. Our assets are about 7 million, and we have 3 full-time staff. And Vital Signs is one part of my job. So we've been producing reports since 2013, and we spend about $6,000 a year. In 2017, we made a pretty big jump in terms of investment. We spent $25,000 just on outreach and engagement, and more on production costs. So, you know, when we started in 2013, we were really focused on releasing a report, putting together something that was interesting, focused on the research, the design, the production. We'd print it, we'd send it out to some community partners, and you know, that was really, we felt the extent of our communications work around that. But we started to think about, you know, we weren't really meeting the goals that we had hoped to meet. We thought about, you know, what if we stopped focusing on the Vital Signs report and started thinking more about Vital Signs as a broader program. And that shift really changed the way that we approached our communications. And there was definitely a lot of untapped potential there in leveraging Vital Signs data, but also the brand and sort of, you know, the buzz around community knowledge there. So this past year in 2017, we didn't release a Vital Signs report. We release reports biannually. So 2017 was our off year. And we really wanted to use this opportunity to kind of build up some more meaningful engagement in our community around the report. You know, we noticed that a lot of people were reading the report. Some of our partners, charitable organizations, were using it, and that was sort of it. So we wanted to sort of deepen that engagement. And we wanted to find a way to, we sort of felt that there was a gap between the Vital Signs data and our granting strategy. And so we were trying to find a way to bridge that gap. And we ended up partnering with the Atkinson Foundation, who had an interest in civic engagement and dialogue, which is sort of an aspirational part of our strategic priorities. And so we added sort of a programmatic goal to what we wanted to do with our Vital Signs program last year. So we did a couple of things. We invested quite a bit in digital. We didn't really have a web presence for Vital Signs, so we developed a website. We created a Vital Signs video, and we spent a bit of time and money investing in social media engagement. We know that you know, data alone doesn't do a whole lot. It needs to come with a story. So we tried to reframe our work in a more narrative sense, and in terms of how we present data, but also in terms of how we ask people to engage with it. And then we created a community engagement strategy. So we designed the Vital Conversations card game in collaboration with the Atkinson Foundation, who invested in that work. And basically, it's a deck of cards. It uses vital signs data as conversation starters, and it's designed to facilitate small group conversations. We recruited hosts in the community to gather small groups of people together to play the game and report back to us. And we ended up engaging throughout the month of October last year, just over 750 people, with really exciting amount of diversity in terms of who was engaged. And a lot of folks who told us they had never heard of the Community Foundation, or they didn't really know much about us. So we were pretty successful in reaching out to folks who you know, we hadn't previously connected with. So what was great was that, you know, the people who were involved, because we use that sort of peer-led model, we have about 79 individuals, just community members, who stepped up to play the role of host. And that gave us an opportunity to really start to build relationships, meaningful relationships with those people. And we're stewarding some of those relationships. But for that 750, you know, a lot of those people had really meaningful, positive experiences playing the card game. And they told us, you know, they felt excited, they felt engaged, they felt a really urgent desire to do something in the community. And all of, you know, that emotional response is tightly linked to the Vital Signs report and the Community Foundation and what we do. So we think that there was a great value in terms of deepening connections that people have with the Community Foundation and connecting us to the kinds of people that share our vision for a vital community. We also use the opportunity to launch our Vital Community Fund, so to link it back to the priorities that were identified through the process. We've realigned our community granting, so we'll be, traditionally we give out our community grants in the spring. This year we'll be bumping it down to October to align with Vital Signs Week, and it'll be focused on the #1 priority that came out of that process, which is linked to belonging. And it also, you know, from a communications perspective, made the case within our organization that investing in digital was worthwhile, which not everybody buys into that. So that was a really positive thing, and that's an avenue that we'll continue to explore. So that's it for me. So I'll throw it back to you, Allison.
Great, thanks so much, Nicole. That was really great. And I just have to say, like, the card game that you guys produced was so great. We have it on file here, and it's just such a creative way to engage your community in a meaningful conversation that's really strategic, but also creative and kind of fun. So kudos to you guys for that. That's a really well done job. So thanks again, Nicole. And I think now we'll move over to Miranda and Sasha from the Toronto Foundation. So I'm just going to change the screen here. Bear with me for a second.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Sasha Chabot-Gaspé. I'm the Public Relations Coordinator at Toronto Foundation. And Miranda and I are coming to you today from the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, the Anishinaabe, and most recently the Mississaugas of New Credit. And I'm Miranda, and I'm the Communications and Creative Services Coordinator here at Toronto Foundation. And so today we're going to be talking to you about the media successes we've had with Toronto's Vital Signs report that we released on February 28th, and some of our strategies around communications. So I'll hand it over to Miranda to get started.
So I'm going to quickly go over how our report changed this year because we have been releasing it for a number of years. And a lot of our success this year is due to our content and how we positioned it and because of the changes that we made. So the first big change that we made was how we looked at the data. Before we just presented the data, and this year we provided more of an analysis and we used an equity lens to do that. And you can find a definition and outline of how we did that if you take a look at our report. The next is our approach was much more collaborative. We've always had an advisory group, which consisted of more of the institutional thought leaders, but this year we added 2 new groups, community leaders who could speak personally to data and leaders of nonprofits who could speak professionally to the data, and they gave input into the report at an early stage of the draft. And the last thing is just calls to action. We've never had these in the report before. So we talked about vital conversations. We explicitly told people that we hoped they would be agitated by the report and that would fuel action. So influencing their voting decisions, use the data to ask questions of local politicians and also to influence their giving.
So I'll talk a bit, this is Sasha here, I'll talk a bit about how we gathered stories for the report. So as Miranda mentioned, we included stories from people with lived experience in the report to bring to life some of the data and analysis. So we reached out to about 5 or 6 community organizations that we partner with to nominate community leaders that they thought would be good contributors to the report. And then from there, I had a list of about 30 people to choose from. I narrowed it down to about 15. And then I jumped on some screening calls, narrowed it down to 10 people. And then with those 10 people, 1 for each issue area, I did some longer interviews. And then in writing the stories, we wanted to keep a few key things in mind. So we kept a realistic yet positive tone, and this is the tone that we try to strike throughout the report. And it can be incredibly hard, but I think it's important to not paint too negative a picture or even to gloss over some of the sort of more negative aspects. An example of this is a quote from our health and wellness expert, Rosie Mensa, on the slide that you see there. And this quote really shows that Rosie's community has a lot of strengths and assets in addition to the challenges that they face. The next, we used a lot of direct quotes because it's their story and we should be hearing their voice as much as possible, but it also makes it more interesting to the reader. And we used a lot of energetic and powerful language, so strongly worded without being over the top, and short, concise sentences and clear and simple language. And this quote from Paul Codd, our expert for income and wealth, really exemplifies that. And finally, we wanted to keep the narratives very empowering. So we wanted to show that these are not victims, but people who have thrived despite all the barriers that they faced in their lives. And they're being incredibly generous in allowing us to share their stories. So we wanted to make sure that this was an empowering and uplifting and beneficial experience for them. So next I'll talk a bit about our traditional media strategy. So some highlights of the earned media coverage that we got. We had 3 pieces in the Toronto Star, 3 spots on Metro Morning on CBC Radio, 2 spots on CBC Here and Now, and coverage on City TV and CTV News. There's much more, and there's more to come. We're just waiting for our media monitoring report from Infomart. So we can't yet compare our sort of impressions and coverage from past years, but we do think we're on track to have had the most coverage and impressions yet in the full sort of 16 years that we've been doing this. And you'll see that there's a really good diversity of mediums. So we've got print, TV, radio, and online coverage. And so one of the ways that we did this was to build a media partnership with the CBC. We started talking to them in about September. We had several meetings with their communications team, which led to this big editorial meeting with about 8 to 10 producers and journalists from various TV and radio shows. And that really laid the groundwork for how we could tell stories with the CBC. Another thing we did was build relationships with key journalists. So one thing that I'm really proud of is our Toronto Star piece by Lori Montsobratton, who's the social justice reporter. And I've been pitching ideas to her consistently over the last 8 months. She never really picked up on anything, although we did build a rapport and build a relationship. And I think that was a key part in sort of getting her to cover vital signs. And then another thing we did was engage influencers. So we sent out embargoed copies of our report to the board and to other key influencers in our network ahead of time. And they read it and wrote their own pieces and used their own networks to get them published. So just some tips on storytelling. Find willing partners. Be super upfront about your expectations so that interviewees are enthusiastic about then later being involved with media. Be empathetic before, during, and after. That really helps you build trust with them and get more compelling details from them. And just keep your tone and your narratives empowering and realistic so that interviewees feel proud of themselves and while you're still being upfront about the realities of their situation. I mean, in terms of traditional media, include stories from people with lived experience. It really gives journalists sort of this one-stop shop for their storytelling, and it makes it really easy for them. Build media partnerships and start laying that groundwork early from about 6 months out from your report release. And then leverage your network of influencers. So getting the powerful people in your networks to use their own voices to talk about the report not only lends you credibility, but actually also increases your reach. So now I'll hand it over to Miranda to talk about social media.
Okay, so I'm going to focus on Twitter because that's our main engagement tool for vital signs, and I'm going to be pretty tactical, but I'm happy to answer questions about LinkedIn, Instagram, or Facebook if you want to send me an email after. So this is a small thing, but I just wanted to mention it because something like vital signs is a great opportunity to get engagement and followers from people who are outside of your usual network. Really only kind of campaigns can do something like that. And getting a little blue check mark gives you credibility when people see your tweets, but they don't have the name recognition. And I can also give some more tips on that afterwards. The next thing is talk about video. So video gets really high priority in feeds and also really high engagement and click-through rates. So it's good content to monetize. So we released this teaser. It was just a one-take video that I did with Sharon, and it took me a couple hours to edit. I used some B-roll that we had on hand, and we used it as kind of a promotional tool prior to the release. And you can just put a tiny bit of money in, like $50, $100, and quadruple the number of views or impressions that you would usually get. The next thing, and this is really important, is to write for the platform. So you wouldn't write the same way that you would in the report as you would for an ad or as you would for social media. So translating data from vital signs can be a bit of a challenge. So it's just important to make sure it's plainly worded, relevant, and engaging. And I use an active personal voice on Twitter. So I rewrote the copy from vital signs, for example, for our Globe and Mail double page spread, and then also rewrote the copy for Twitter. And you can see here an example is how I packaged some of the data for International Women's Day. And it's also important to organize and prioritize your data. People want to share information that's straightforward and easy to access and useful to them. Useful or compelling, if it can be both, the more likely it is to be engaged with. So this is an example where I compiled all of the radio coverage that we got, and I tweeted it in a thread. So if someone retweets the first tweet in a thread, then the entire package of tweets goes together, and it's really easy for people to scroll down the list and see what the radio coverage was. So we live tweeted and live streamed our launch event. Little tips for this is to include photos as often as you can because they're more likely to be shared, and to make sure that your standalone quotes make sense out of context, because even though you're tweeting at a time about a specific topic, tweets do go out alone. So it's important that quotes are powerful and standalone. The next thing is to activate influencers. So we were really lucky that we already had our advisory team and then all of our city voices to participate in this. But it's really easy to reach out to your stakeholders who use social media and send them some pre-written tweets with shareables with your branding and your messaging, and then they can just copy and paste and send it out on the day. And the last thing is to be really responsive to people who are tweeting at you and asking questions. So that can be as simple as a thanks for sharing, or also responding to questions and criticism. Because if you don't respond, then it shows that your online presence is shallow. But this way, you're really engaging with people and talking about the content in their report at a deeper level. So that's it. Really tactical things that we did this year to really beef up our storytelling here about the report.
Back to you.
Thanks so much. Sorry, I was just trying to find the mute button, but that was great. Thank you, Miranda and Sasha. That was really extensive coverage of your strategy, so we really appreciate that. And it sounds, I mean, you guys did a great job. We were following along here in Ottawa with your online engagement. Yeah, no, you guys did a great job. So thanks so much. And so now I guess we will move into our question period. I haven't seen any questions come through on the chat so far. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to ask them now. We do have a couple of questions ready here just in case we didn't have any right away. And I guess I'll start by asking Miranda and Sasha, since your presentation is so fresh. And so Sasha, I wanted to ask you more about your outreach to community leaders. So it sounds like a really great strategy, and I'm really curious to learn a little bit more about how you conducted that outreach, how you identified those leaders, and then what the effect was in using them with your communication strategy. Like, did you find that using those local voices was more popular, or kind of what were the benefits of that strategy?
Yeah, I think like one of the biggest reasons why we got so much pickup from media was because we had those stories in the report. Like I said, it's like a one-stop shop for journalists, so that you're not just talking about the report and the numbers, but you're showing that these are real people and these are how their lives are being impacted by some of the stuff you're talking about in the report. And so the way that we reached out, so we sent sort of a call out to about 5 or 6 community organizations to tell them what we're doing and what we were looking for and why we were doing it, and ask them to sort of put together a list of names under each sort of vital signs issue area that they could recommend that might be, you know, good participants for this project. And so from that, I had a list of about 30 people, different names with, and each organization provided like a little short blurb about each person, just to kind of give me a sense of what their experience with that issue had been. And then from there, I picked the 15 that I thought maybe had the most kind of compelling or interesting stories. And then from there, I jumped on sort of 15-minute screening calls with each of them to get a better sense of their story, but also to be really clear about what our expectations or what we wanted from them, and to see if that was something that was interesting to them and also that they were available for. And there were several people who were like, no, I'm not comfortable with media. And so that was just kind of like, okay, well then this isn't a good fit for this project. But most people were really excited to get involved. And so from there, I narrowed it down to 10 and had those longer hour-long interviews with each person. And then from there, wrote the stories. And one thing that really helped me in that process was actually recording all of my interviews. I know that sounds kind of basic, but it just helps you go back, like it helps you be present in the interview, and then you can go back and quote people pretty much verbatim as to, you know, what they've said about certain things. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's super great. Thank you so much. So a couple of questions did come in. So thank you again, Sasha. This one here is for Nicole. The question is, was the card game launched after the report was produced or during, when you were working on the report?
Yeah, so we released, our last full Vital Signs report was released in 2016. And then we released our reports biennially, so every 2 years. So 2016 was the report release, and then 2017 is sort of the year where we try and build engagement and try to leverage that report. So the report pre-existed the card game. When we developed the card game, we drew primarily on the 2016 report, but we also pulled from past reports. We had done sort of a special edition report that looked exclusively at belonging and inclusion. And you know, our indicators tend to vary from year to year. So because we took that narrative approach, we sort of pulled out the stories that have been building through the indicators over the years, from between 2013 and 2016, and then paired that up with some of the, you know, the specific indicators, and built the card game around that sort of data story, rather than exclusively being the 2016 report. Does that answer the question, hopefully?
It sounds good. Yep, I don't see any other comments, so that sounds great. We have another question for you, Nicole. Can you expand on your vital signs budget? So it says 6,000 to 25,000 is a big jump. Can you break that down a little bit more?
Yeah, so basically prior to this past year, 2017, we were producing about a 10-page booklet. The costs involved, you know, some nominal costs around community engagement as we gather the research and data, production and design costs, printing and dissemination, and then, you know, we do a bit of a road show, go around to different folks in the community, municipal councils, that sort of thing, and talk about the data. So it was a pretty low cost endeavor. Last year, when we did the Vital Conversations initiative, we had developed a partnership with the Atkinson Foundation, who was interested in exploring sort of, you know, community dialogue and building civic engagement through conversation. So because we had this sort of shared interest, and because our methods aligned with what they were kind of keen to experiment on, they invested in the work. They gave us a $35,000 grant. We did get some funding through CFC's Canada 150 Fund. And so the total budget for that year was about $42,000, but about 25 of that was spent on the actual outreach and engagement part. The rest of it was spent on design and production, that sort of thing, because we were investing in web design and video production and more costly pieces there.
Great, thanks so much. We have two more questions for you, Nicole. How did you organize the 750 people that participated in Vital Conversations? And the second question is asking you to expand a little more on what a Vital Community Fund is.
Sure. How did we organize 750 people? We didn't. We used a strategy where we aimed to recruit 100 people in our community who would then organize their own conversations. So the card game was a tool that we gave to these, we ended up with about 79 individuals and 10 or 11 charitable organizations or nonprofit groups that acted as hosts. So our relationship was only with the host, so it was under 100 people, and our role was to give them the tools to plan and facilitate their own conversation, so that you know, we'd reach out to a host, that host would gather a group of friends or family, coworkers, facilitate the conversation, and then report back to us. So it was sort of like, I guess, a bit of a pyramid scheme, but that's how we were able, with our capacity, to reach that number of people in such a short amount of time. What was the second question, Allison?
The second part of that question was asking about you to expand on your Vital Community Fund.
Yeah, so that's basically, it's just an undesignated fund that we can use, and other foundations, I think, have similar funds set up, basically, that we can use to direct to whatever community priorities are most pressing at that time. So as folks probably know, sometimes, you know, your donor designated funds don't always go to what vital signs or what other community knowledge might tell you are the most pressing needs or the biggest priorities. So the Vital Community Fund is a way for us to build up sort of discretionary, our capacity for discretionary granting.
Awesome, thank you so much. Yeah, that sounds great. I did have one question just on your card game, Nicole, and I was wondering how you spread the word, because I know you mentioned in your presentation there that over half of the participants were new to the foundation. So I'm really curious, and it sounds like you had really positive responses and engagement with people who had similar priorities and similar shared goals. So I'm very curious to learn a little bit more about how did you get those people involved, and how did you do that outreach to the kind of new people that hadn't previously engaged with your foundation before?
Yeah, well, we used an influencer strategy as well. We found 5 folks in our community who are sort of very active on different social media platforms, primarily Facebook, Twitter, and to a certain extent Instagram, but had followings in sort of different demographics in the area. And we brought them on board early on and launched our campaign with them as sort of our first 5 hosts. And their role was to tell people that they were hosting a conversation, talk about what that was, and then actually host the conversation and share that experience on social media. So that gave us a pretty big boost sort of coming out the gate. We did do some more traditional outreach, personally inviting folks that we're connected with, donors, supporters, partners, volunteers, asking them to be a host. So we'd send them letters and emails saying, hi, Atul, we really appreciated your community leadership. We're doing this initiative and we really think you'd be a great host. And we got a lot of uptake. We also ran a pretty aggressive social media campaign, and strategically, we were trying to engage people on an emotional level rather than, issue-based. So we started putting out memes, quotes, articles, photos that made people feel good about the community or tapped into a sense of frustration around some of the priority issues that we have. And whenever anyone liked, retweeted, shared one of our posts, I would follow up with them with a personal message saying, hey, I saw that you liked our post, or thanks for sharing. I think you'd be a great host, and here's how you can sign up. And we got a lot of people we didn't know through that strategy. And the last thing that we did, we sort of tracked commentary on local news stories. So for example, we had our local Sears close down in October. And so there's all this news coverage about Sears closing down. And there's all these folks in Peterborough commenting on Facebook about the state of our local economy, et cetera, et cetera. So I'd go on to all of those posts and say, hey, if you're really concerned about the state of our economy, you might be interested in doing something about it. Here's an opportunity for you to get involved. We didn't get as much uptake on that, but it did work in a couple of instances.
That's amazing. It sounds like you guys did a ton of work around that, and a little bit of heavy lifting, but it sounds like it really paid off at the end. So that's amazing. Thanks so much for sharing. There is a question here asking if the webinar will be made available online, and it will be. So just to answer that one, I'm not sure if my responses are going through properly. There's a question around if the Vital Conversations card game will be made available to other community foundations, and we do have it on file here, so I can share that with you. And then we have one more question for you, Nicole, that's just asking if you can explain a little bit more in detail how the card game was employed.
How it was employed? Well, basically, it was designed to be sort of a closed loop in terms of facilitating a conversation. So we designed it based on the assumption that whoever was hosting a conversation may have zero experience doing any kind of group facilitation. We designed it on the assumption that people playing the game might have zero knowledge about any of the issues we're talking about. They might have never encountered Vital Signs or the Community Foundation before. And we also designed it knowing that a lot of the topics, there were sort of three themes that we looked at. One was local economy, one was belonging and inclusion, and one was sort of about urbanization in our community. And those are all really polarized topics in Peterborough right now. So we designed it knowing that people were coming at this with, you know, different levels of knowledge, different experiences, different opinions, and a lot of emotions. So we tried to create a tool that could guide any kind of diverse small group through some kind of a conversation that was respectful and meaningful. And it took, you know, it's not a perfect tool. It took us, we did a lot of prototyping. It was developed over about 3 months based on research and then pilot sessions. But basically it had instructions in terms of how to play the game that were pretty clear and concise. It had guidelines. Everybody got a guidelines card that sort of said, you know, this is how you should think about conducting yourself in this conversation. It had 10 conversation starters, which were sort of the piece that connected back to Vital Signs. And then I had a series of conversation prompts that were dealt out to people who played. And that was to sort of, you know, try and get the conversation going and also create a bit of distance between people's emotions and their opinions and the way that people, it can be really hard to get people to talk about polarizing, difficult stuff face to face. So the prompts were designed to sort of get that conversation going. Then we had a follow-up card that had our branding, our contact info, and sort of tried to create a way that people could walk away with something in their hand that linked back to the Community Foundation.
Awesome. Yeah, it sounds like you guys took a very thoughtful approach. So if we can share the game afterwards, I think that people will kind of see exactly what you're talking about with the guideline cards and the conversation starters and things like that, and also how you included specific Peterborough statistics as one section of the card. So yeah, no, it's a great tool. It's a really well done. So thank you, Nicole. We do have a question here for the Toronto team, so Miranda and Sasha. There's a question here asking if you can talk a little bit more about the process that you went through to build the media partnership with the CBC.
Yeah, sure. So our VP of community engagement here had a relationship already with somebody on the CBC's communications team. And so we started there. We met with a couple of people from the comms team to talk about some of our upcoming projects, not just Vital Signs, and to see if there was interest there. And then from there, they were interested, but they just kind of wanted to learn more. So we put together a proposal for them and had some ideas specifically around like what kinds of stories we could tell and what platforms those could be shared on. And we kind of built from there. We had a couple more meetings with the comms team, and then it led to a big sort of meeting about a month before Vital Signs was released with about 8 to 10 different producers and journalists from across CBC. So there was, people from radio, people from TV, people from their enterprise unit, which is sort of their sort of investigative, unique journalism. And we brought to that meeting, we brought a bunch of people from our team. So we had our CEO, our president and CEO, Sharon, there. We had Sean and Julia, who work with Social Planning Toronto, who were actually the authors of the report. And we had a couple of people, 2 people who were like voices of lived experience. So Rosie Mensah and Agnes Thompson, who could sort of, again, talk about their experiences and reflect how the data actually plays out in real people's lives. And then we had a couple of community leaders, community organization leaders there as well to give a sort of broader perspective on some of the issues that they face. And it was a really incredible meeting. We shared a lot of different stories and a lot of knowledge and a lot of different ideas for how we could tell those stories. And then we went from there. And so when about a week before Vital Signs was due to be released, I followed up with a bunch of the different journalists and producers that were in the meeting, and with some very specific pitch ideas, and we kind of took it from there. And a lot of them said yes, we want to do it, and that's it.
Awesome, thanks so much, guys. That was great. We seem to be out of questions for now, so if you are sitting on something that's lingering in the back of your mind, feel free to put it through. We do have a few minutes left. I think Jen actually does have a question for Toronto, so I'll hand it over to her.
Thanks, Allison. Actually, it could be for all of today's presenters, but Sasha and Miranda, perhaps you can go first. I wonder if you could speak, since you all focused quite heavily on digital engagement, I wonder if you could speak a little bit to how you measured your success, or in the process of measuring your success for Toronto. It's a little bit more fresh, and some of the metrics and analytics that you're collecting or have collected following the release of the report and the activities that you've led.
Okay, this is Miranda. So there are those things that you can collect, like impressions, your followers, like if that increases. Those are called vanity metrics because they show that there's an awareness building about your brand, but it doesn't actually measure engagement. So we're still waiting for our engagement data to come back from the company that we hired to do like a roundup of our traditional and social media, but the engagement is more the retweets, people commenting, people sharing. So you may not necessarily be able to measure that kind of stuff through, say, your Twitter analytics if they don't tag you, but maybe they just use the hashtag. But there are some really cool tools that you can use. There's one that you just pay $20 and it gives you a week retroactively looking at a hashtag, and it gives you all of the different kinds of metrics. So the vanity metrics, but the engagement metrics too. You can also measure tone. So basically what it does is it looks at kind of like the keywords that are being included in all of the posts using your hashtag or your handle. But I find for Vital Signs that's actually not a really great metric to use because we are talking about sensitive topics and issues, and so sometimes that can translate as a negative tone, even though the purpose of the post is actually positive in sharing that information. So I don't have a lot of our key metrics ready yet, but for example, this year, usually we get around 80 new followers a month, and over the Vital Signs week or 2 weeks after Vital Signs, we got 250. So like that's a really big difference. And in terms of impressions, we got around 800,000 more than we did last year. So that's a pretty big increase on the vanity side of things. And we'll be able to share something through the communication Slack group when we have our full analysis.
Fantastic, great, thanks. How about you, Nicole?
Yeah, so we looked at some of those metrics Miranda mentioned as well in terms of the vanity stuff. Impressions are a good indicator for us of what, when we're experimenting with different kinds of content, what's sort of working and what's not working, what gets picked up, because we're looking to strike an emotional chord. Impressions helped, but definitely looking at engagement, really just surface level stuff, shares, likes, retweets, that sort of thing. but because we have, I mean, this is just me doing this work, and really only part of me. We have pretty low capacity to engage with analytics in sort of a developmental or ongoing process during a campaign. So what we did was we set up an engagement pyramid, and rather than focus on specific metrics, we looked at trying to push people up that pyramid, and about halfway up is when people sign up to be a host. So I can't remember what the numbers ended up looking like retroactively, but the focus was really on tracking whether or not we were pushing people in that direction. And so that kind of, the number of people who were signing up was sort of our key performance indicator, and that's really what we were monitoring, just making sure that that number was rising throughout the month.
Super. Thank you for sharing that, both Toronto and Peterborough. You each mentioned different resources, so perhaps what Alison and I can do here on our end as we're wrapping up information and takeaways from today's call is include those resources for the group in our next communication on the listserv.
Thanks, Jen. Yeah, so it sounds like there's a desire for people to see the card game from Peterborough, so we can share that. And then also, we did talk, someone did mention the Slack group, the communications Slack group. So if you're not a member of the Slack group, just please don't hesitate to get in touch with either Jen or myself, and we can make sure that you're added to it. We also do have a Vital Signs Slack group running, and less focused on comms, more focused on the program in general. Yeah, so if you want to join either one of those, just send us an email, and like we mentioned earlier, we're happy to set up a 30-minute phone call and talk to you about your communication strategy in a little more detail. So it looks like we're just coming to the end of our presentation today. We do have, sorry, just a note came through there. We're coming through the end of our presentation, and so if you have any other questions, or if you review those slides that we sent out over the listserv and it raises any flags, or you want a little more information or just a one-on-one chat, like I said, feel free to reach out to Jen or myself, and we're happy to set up a phone call. Thank you so much to our presenters today, Nicole, Miranda, and Sasha. You guys brought forward some really interesting perspectives, and I think that we all learned a little bit from your strategies that were just really creative, and they were, I mean, from our perspective, they look very successful. So congratulations on that, and thanks again for sharing. Everybody have a great day.